Space is touted to be India's next big growth sector. As part one of this series showed us, the potential of this sector is enormous, with a huge number of jobs across various kinds of roles being expected to be created over the next 10 to 20 years. But to meet and realize this potential, we need a huge and very talented workforce. So, how do we go about building this skilled workforce? Where do we start? And what challenges do we see on the way? Let's find out. So, to be a part of the space sector, in what areas does one need to build their skills?
Very large number of children or students generally want to do engineering, or more particularly computer science, or for example mechanical or electronics and communication and things like that, or they want to become doctor and things like that. But if you look at the space science and technology or space sector,
completely different disciplines, all of them contribute to the space endeavor.
it needs people from all possible domain of science.
From software analysis, so just hardcore software, being able to program things, understand how to use artificial intelligence and data analytics and a whole host of that, to really what you might consider hardcore space technology, which is rockets and launchers, aerodynamics, control systems. Of course, there's chemistry for the fuels, there's a lot of mechanical engineering, there is a huge amount of electronics, which is obvious. So there's lots of different disciplines across the board.
So whatever you do, whatever engineering or sciences subjects you want to choose, you can choose, and after doing your basic graduation or post-graduation, you can join the space program.
And therefore, in terms of preparation, the first thing is a very, very strong foundation, mainly in the so-called STEM areas, which is science, technology, engineering, or mathematics.
This kind of learning needs to start at the school level. But as things stand, are our schools equipped enough to take this on?
One barrier is the teacher himself or herself has limited knowledge and has not really updated themselves or not been updated through training or through their own reading or through their own efforts on a better understanding of contemporary things of both what is happening and the new breakthroughs in science and technology, which would help them to bring something to the classroom.
That's really interesting. But could you give us an example of what is being missed out?
There is a word which is nowadays coined as space weather. Like the weather very close to Earth, we call it a space weather. Space weather means how this important processes which happens on the sun affects us on the Earth, which interacts and affects our navigation, our communication, our command and controls, our meteorology, because ultimately the driver is the sun, and that part is the one which is still not coming into the school level, which is required, which will also kindle and generate interest among the students in the classes. The second part is about when you go beyond sun-earth relationship. Some part of that is there in the curriculum in form of solar system, and you are taught about is what these planets are and how they are made up of and things like that. But then there's another bigger part of it is what about exosolar system? There is solar system outside our own solar system. And we are now talking about so many exoplanets being discovered. More than 4,000, 5,000 exoplanets have been discovered. So that kind of field should also be brought in the classrooms, particularly in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade kind of students.
And this, of course, is a much more difficult question, infrastructure in schools. So do you have a laboratory, a tinkering place? Can you do something? I talked earlier of model rocketry. Very exciting, great things to be done. Need some money, need some resources. How many schools have those? They barely have enough to do their normal teaching. So I quite understand the constraints. From what I've seen in schools, most of the books that are available, and I don't mean just textbooks, even other reading, in most of the Indian languages have very little extra on science and almost nothing on space. So to me, this is a barrier for those whose comfort language is not English. It's sad because the knowledge exists, the material exists, some of it is very well done and really interesting, would kindle fires in youngsters' minds and ignite them to go on to greater things.
Actually, space is a huge. One part is astronomy, other part is rocketry, other part is satellites, other part is applications. So there is a very vast canvas on which a person can generate his or her interest.
So, how can these challenges be overcome, and how can we generate and sustain more interest around space?
Interest of looking at the space is there right from the childhood.
All of us, I think, are born with that natural curiosity. We, from age zero, you might say, we look up, you look into the sky, as we say, look into the night sky, and unless you're in Delhi and Gurgaon in winter, you see the stars.
In our in childhood we have heard poems from our mother or grandmothers, chanda mama dur ke and all those things. Means it is directly narrating and relating the space to the child.
One way is to create common centers. You call them science museums, science activity labs, science centers, whatever. So instead of having one such facility per school, you might have one for 5-10 schools in the area, and people can come and go.
If the community takes part in any activity, it grows faster. I should say it grows exponentially. I have interacted with many astronomy clubs, far and wide, from different geographical locations in the country, where what they are doing is there has to be somebody who takes interest, and then they say, okay, we will put an astronomy club, we will buy a small telescope, and over weekends, like when there are no schools and things like that, let us have a night watch. And this is actually a thing which really develops interest among the kids, particularly because they see the planet very close with their naked eyes using a small telescope.
A very good example from early days, which I had so fortunate to be associated with earlier on, going back to the 1960s, is the Vikram Sarabhai Community Science Center in Ahmedabad, where so many students come for actual, practical, exciting, very innovative demonstrations, experiments, hands-on stuff, completely hands-on, which youngsters from ages 6 or 7 to adults can come and do out there. So centers like that, which we need to set up and create.
The other thing is like what Government of India is doing is initiating workshops or lecture series. It could be from the government, it could be from NGOs, it could be from own initiatives.
The other part of my answer is the systemic part is important, not just smaller individual things. And to me, one example comes from the IT industry. In the late 80s, but 1990s in particular, and going forward, there was need for a huge amount of IT talent, and we were short of talent, and yet we had fantastic possibilities. The IT economy was taking off in the 90s and early 2000s. And the only constraint really from India's point of view was availability of talent. We had it, but we wanted more because we could get more stuff. And you had a whole flowering of people, of educational institutions, of universities, of private institutions that provided, skilling, training, call it what you will, ranging from a few weeks to full courses. Some did great jobs, some didn't. But you had a whole host of flowering. We need to look at something similar in the space tech area and getting private parties interested to do this. But the foundation of all this has to be creating excitement and interest in the area.
People from all backgrounds are required in space. The basic requirement is you should be good at your education, you should have good knowledge of fundamentals, and then you can take it up as either joining ISRO, you can be an entrepreneur, or whatever way you feel like.
I think we have a great future in this area, and for young people today interested in this area, the next 2 decades to me are going to be all about space. Some of it will be related, not space related, but separately genetics and health sciences, and the rest, the other part of the big growth sector, is really going to be in the space area.